Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to the Library Tour of Doom, where Lord Ganesha and I are taking you through a tour not only through my library book by book, but apparently through the ranks of every single book ever written, book by book, day by day. Today we have a slim and heavily illustrated thing from 2018. This is Look Big by Rachel Levin. And the subtitle is And Other Tips for Surviving Animal Encounters of All Kinds. This is a heavy-duty thing. Pages are heavy-duty. It's clearly meant to be jammed into a backpack, and it is heavily illustrated. Full-color illustrations on every page. And the subtitle isn't kidding, because the author really does look at every kind of animal encounter. You might think encounters with aggressive, charismatic megafauna, but there's rats in here, mice, lice, raccoons, owls, crows, things that you wouldn't ordinarily expect to find in a wildlife encounter, or what to do wildlife encounter book. It's all alphabetical, so you can go straight from alligators all the way to the end, and it gives you an overview of where these dangers are most likely to happen and what the animal in question is like when it's not being threatened and when it is, and most especially in every single case, a section that says what to do. What to do if you have an encounter with one of these animals. In most cases, the best possible advice is not to. Of course, that's not the point of a book like this. The point of a book like this is what happens if it really happens. Of course, the best possible advice, for instance, for avoiding an encounter with a great white shark is to stay out of the ocean. Don't swim recreationally in the ocean where you can't see a threat coming and are completely helpless and resemble the animal in question's food of choice. So the number one piece of advice would be don't do that. Don't go into that. Now that doesn't apply to most. A lot of the animals in this book are going to come and find you. A lot of the entries in this book are about forms of wildlife of one kind or another that make their way into your home itself. And some of the cases there are, what to do if you have ants in your pantry, what to do if you have if a bat wanders into your living room, stuff like that. A lot of the cases in there are not only entertainingly written but well illustrated. I had problems with the book on a couple of occasions. As if you've watched this channel for a long period of time, you will know that I have had a lot of encounters of the kind that are described in this book. And I've also talked with a lot of people, probably as many experts in the field as the author interviewed for this book. Only in some cases I'm not sure who she talked to, because some of the advice in here is a little on the strange side or a little muted. I mean, in exotic situations like encountering a great white shark where you are scuba diving and suddenly you come to the attention of a 10-foot-long, 1-ton predator in its natural environment where you would die if you took your aqualung off, well, okay, in a situation like that you want all the guidance you can get, and it's pretty specific. But by far the most likely big, stereotypical, charismatic megafauna encounter that you are going to have, the readers of this book are going to have, by far the most likely ones, are encounters with either bears or the encounter on the cover, the encounter with a moose. And in both those cases, the advice given is a little bit on the has some strange details. For instance, in the account of what to do if you encounter a moose, well, Rachel Levin gives you a very good shorthand about warning signals. If you encounter a moose on a trail, she talks with an expert who says if you encounter a moose anywhere in the wild, just assume that you are encountering a known serial killer with a shotgun. Just react. Your sense of caution should be just that exaggerated, because moose are enormous. People who encounter them, who have only seen them in storybooks, are always stunned, speechless by how big they are. No nature documentary conveys the sheer size and power of these things, and they're also almost always they're in one kind of a bad mood or another, especially if it's a full-grown male who's in constantly searching for a territory and a mate. And moose are also often maddened by mosquitoes and ticks that assault them in such numbers as you wouldn't believe, so that when an adult male moose in the picturesque nature documentaries that you see, when the camera stops rolling and they shake, it's just a spray of blood. in all directions because they're constantly being irritated to the point of madness by these parasites. Uh, the author points out correctly that in a situation like that, you might as well run, although running is not going to do any more good in terms of sprinting than with a moose than with a bear. Both can easily top 30 miles an hour. They can easily outrun you, even with a head start, even at a great distance, even over uneven terrain. They are much, much faster than you are. And the author points out that, if you encounter a moose and it starts to snort and snuffle and drool and maybe urinate, those are signs that it intends to attack you, that it's not just unnerved to find you there, but intends to do something about it. And all that is right, but the author also adds an odd comment that because you are smaller, you are more nimble than a one-ton herbivore. And anyone who has ever seen moose in the wild knows they can turn on a proverbial dime. They are much more nimble than you are. I don't know what that's supposed to convey. Maybe you might have luck if you dodge behind a tree or something like that. I don't really know. In this case, no offense to the author, you can take my word for it. A moose, an American bison, water buffalo in other parts of the world, they are more nimble than you are, as well as faster. You just have to hope for luck. Climb a tree. They can't do that. The author is right to point out that as attention-grabbing as a moose's antlers may be, their hooves are incredibly sharp. They can easily disembowel you. And the same thing is true about the advice about bears in this book. The signature advice is the title for bears or jaguars or mountain lions, for instance, which is make yourself look threatening. If it comes to that, if it comes to a confrontation, make yourself look threatening. The first rule is always to avoid a confrontation. So no direct eye contact, no direct body posture. Turn a little bit to the side, look down, speak in a calming but firm voice that, I don't want any trouble. I don't want any trouble. Everything's fine. Everything's just fine. Don't look at the animal and don't approach the animal and don't face the animal with your body. Be moving slowly and calmly back the way you came. That's what the look big, the look big is what happens if that doesn't work. If the animal is still interested in you after you've done that, he's still approaching, then what you want to do is change tactics and look as big as you can. Put your hiking poles up in the air. Flap your coat up wide on either side or up over your head in a big Y shape or whatever to disconcert the animal, because if they're not taking your confessions of goodwill at face value, then it means they're contemplating whether or not they want to do something about you or to you. And most animals, even big predators, won't like the risk-reward ratio of doing something with an animal that they're not 100% sure they can take. That won't happen with moose because they are so big. It won't happen with, for instance, if you're ever unlucky enough to be the object of aggressive attention from an African elephant, then don't bother. Don't bother with any of that. Just make out you will. But there is a world of difference between the two types of bears you are likely to encounter in Western North America. One is a black bear. And the name shouldn't fool you because they can be any color. And the other is a grizzly bear, often called a brown bear. And again, the name shouldn't fool you because their color range is pretty broad. The key to differentiate between the two of them is their size. First of all, grizzly bears are ever so much bigger than brown bears, but also their physiology. Black bears have a sharp face, and grizzly bears have a brow. They have a big indented face. And black bears also have a smooth back. And grizzly bears have a big hump right at their forward shoulders. Black bears also have much, much smaller claws. With a grizzly bear, if you can see one clearly, if you can see it walking, like for instance on a big riverbed, you'll notice right away that the claws are as big as piano keys and they stick right out. It's important to know which you're dealing with because black bears will almost always shy from a fight. They'll almost always run away from an encounter. Even a mother protecting cubs, which is a little bit blurred in this book, even a mother protecting cubs will almost certainly bluff, shepherd the cubs in the opposite direction, shepherd them away from you. Mothers protecting cubs are a dicey encounter anyway, but black bears don't usually want a confrontation, and grizzly bears usually do. And therefore, the advice given for the two of them is drastically different. Unless you're in a straight-up predation scenario where you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the bear is not just inquisitive or protective of cubs, but is actually stalking you, where it's interested in killing and eating you. If that's the case, then the bear's movements will be completely calm. There will be no jaw clicking. There'll be no huffing. The ears will be forward. The bear will be paying you concerted, calm attention. That is a very, very bad sign. That means that you're in drastic danger. Now, if a black bear does that, the danger still isn't all conclusive, because even then, even if a black bear is doing that, if you make a fuss, if you make loud noises and roar and raise and wheel your arms and whatnot, even then a black bear will usually decide it's not worth it. Whereas a grizzly bear will. A grizzly bear is going, if a grizzly bear decides to attack you, then, well, first of all, like for instance, the author says that if a grizzly bear attacks you, if it's a mother protecting her cubs, you should play dead. And if it's an aggressive male, you should fight for your life. When I don't think that the majority of experts that she would talk to would say that. They would say, if you're hiking in the woods and you encounter an adult grizzly bear that's, you know, as big as your refrigerator, and that you're not going to have time to assess whether or not it's a mother protecting her cubs. Oftentimes you can't see them. Or maybe a non-territorial bear who's protecting a recent kill that's nearby. That again, maybe you don't see it, but they're protecting it anyway. I think most experts would agree that it's a very bad idea to play dead with a grizzly bear, because they're extremely aggressive animals. If you play dead with a black bear, it's going to sniff around you, probably tear apart a backpack if you have one on top of you, and then leave you alone. A grizzly bear will almost certainly, they're carrion feeders. Well, a grizzly bear, if you play dead, will, first of all, it can flip you over like a toy, no matter what you do. And a grizzly bear is in a bad mood, better to fight. A fight is more likely to disincline the animal to further aggression if you reach that point of no return. The key here in any of these instances is not to fight at all. The key is just to avoid it in all instances, to do whatever you can to avoid it. Same thing is true with shark encounters. For instance, you want the author talks with an expert who says that if a shark is paying you attention, if it's lunging at you and retreating, sharks will work up their courage to actually attack you by doing that. They'll make a series of darts in and out. Odd thing to think about, but especially when you're talking about an animal that's, you know, 2 tons and lives in a world that has no physical geographical boundaries. But nevertheless, most great white sharks, for instance, like to kill by surprise, which is why they will almost certainly attack you in murky water. You almost certainly won't easily see it coming. And the first charge, usually they will dart in. If they see that you're paying attention, if they see that you're ready, they'll dart off again. They're going to come back, but they won't do it right then. The time when you will get an exploratory bite is if they know you don't see them coming. So you just get hit by a cannon out of nowhere. And the thing about the exploratory bite of a great white shark, it almost certainly won't return. You don't taste good to them. But the thing about it is the same thing as a bluff charge, for instance, by an adult male grizzly bear, is that it doesn't matter if they're not going to return. You're not going to survive the inquiry. So I don't know. I would probably have gone into more detail on those things if I were the author, since those are the things most likely to happen to any of her readers. But all in all, again, I recommend the book. I don't recommend the tossed off advice at a couple of points with a couple of these big monster predators. One tossed off detail is to abandon your dogs. Needless to say, that rubbed me the wrong way. But I would recommend this book, not necessarily as a thing to carry around with you, since if you're in a situation like that, you don't have time to consult a book. You want to, the key thing that's going to happen here is going to be a bear, not a moose, probably not a shark, probably not even a rattlesnake, probably. The main thing that's going to happen to you, the prospective buyer of this book, is going to be a bear. And the key there is to know what kind of a bear you're dealing with. Because a black bear, to put it in, you know what I mean, but to put it in one kind of phrase, a black bear can be reasoned with, and a grizzly bear cannot be. So you want to take that into account, to observe all of the precautions that are drummed into you, when especially you're going into the backcountry where brown bears and black bears both live. You will, unless you drive into that backcountry on your own without consulting with game wardens or rangers of any kind, which is dumb on its own sake. You want people to know where you're going. Unless you do that, you are going to have precepts about bear safety drummed into your head, and you should listen to all of it. Listen to all of it. If you take all the precautions that are necessary, you will almost certainly avoid an encounter with a bear at all. Most bears don't want anything to do with you. Even grizzly bears, most of them don't want anything to do with you. And the ones who do, simple precautions. Be unthreatening. Be calm. Back out the way you came. Don't make stupid decisions. Don't think about a selfie with a bear. Don't talk to a bear. Don't talk directly to a bear while you're looking at him, like saying, "Oh, you don't seem so bad. I'm here to commune with nature." You'll be communing with nature in the most direct way possible if you do that to a grizzly bear. You want to let it know you're there. Silence is threatening. You want to avoid eye contact because that's a challenge, and you can't win. You cannot run a grizzly bear, and you have no conception, none, about how strong a grizzly bear is. None at all. So you want to avoid that. Just avoid it completely. You can avoid a bear encounter almost entirely by observing the right protocols. For instance, when you make a camp, keep your food in containers. Most campsites will have bear containers so that you can just put everything in there. Also pay extra attention. Their sense of smell is 1,000 times greater than yours. Pay attention to what might be attracting them that you don't think of as food. If you think about those sorts of things when you're in an area, especially in the backcountry, where there are bears, you almost certainly won't have an encounter. I know people who've hiked forever and ever. They hardly ever encounter bears. Bears sign plenty of times, but bears leave them alone. If you leave out food, my own little bear is making her bed and signaling that it's time for me to shut up. So you don't want me to get me going about bear safety. I did that once upon a time. I wish I could find the video. I was doing a video on a completely different subject, and I went off on a 20-minute tangent about bear safety. I think I did it in 2 consecutive videos on 2 consecutive days. I have no idea when or where, but I can go on at great length because they're on your mind when you're out, especially when you're hiking in backcountry, and especially with, in my case, you're with a lot of dogs. If they're not on your mind, they should be, because their numbers are growing, and that means you have to be cautious. You have to think about it. You're in their area. And there's a point that, just to conclude, there's a point that's made over and over again in this book with animals that are predators, apex predators especially, in their own right, which is that if you have a face-to-face encounter, that means that you have done a number of things wrong, unless you're just spectacularly unlucky. A face-to-face encounter means that usually it means you have done a number of things wrong, or that wouldn't happen. Chance encounters still do happen, and this book will tell you what to do as much as can be done quite a few times. In this book, the author basically says, and her experts basically say, well, it's in God's hands. Past a certain point, it's in God's hands. She, for instance, says that any shark that's longer than 6 feet is a danger to you. I can personally attest that any shark longer than 3 feet is a danger to you. Trust me. They can move like lightning, and a bite can be really bad. And like for instance, any shark longer than 6 feet that is determined to attack you, if you make the foolish choice to go scuba diving or something like that, there's not much you can do. You're told the usual things about punching it on the snout, or they try to punch it on the gills or whatnot, but it's 100 times faster than you are and 10 times stronger than you are. So if it really wants it, if most of the big animals in here really want to do you mischief, there's not much that you can do about it, except to follow precautions. This book lists a few of those. So I wouldn't advise it as an in-field guide. The in-field guide that works best is to listen to your experts where you're camping, even if it's in a campground. Bears go to campgrounds all the time. But especially if you're planning on heading off the roads and into the backcountry, consult with experts first. Let them know you're there and pick their brains about what you should do. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. Of course, since it's about bears, it went long, but I will be back. Thank you, Book 2.